Good afternoon from a gray St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm Rudy Maxa. If you've never watched this webcast before, if you're watching me after the fact on YouTube, I'm a travel journalist. I was a contributing writer to National Geographic Traveler for 17 years. Have about 98 shows on public television on the great destinations of the world. Used to host a public radio show called The Savvy Traveler. But my first 20 years, I was a scandal monger for the Washington Post and Washingtonian Magazine in Washington, D.C. But I've since gone straight. And people are happier to see me as a travel journalist than when I was as we used to say, the catfish at the bottom of the barrel as a scandal writer at the Post in Washington. We do this every 2 weeks now during the start of COVID when more people were at home. We did this every week, but just recently we've gone to every week. I'm going to skip Christmas and New Year's because I don't think on New Year's Day a lot of people want to watch a webcast. So our next one will be on the 7th of January. But for today is the 17th of December. Nice to have you here. This will be our last one for this year. So I'll start out by wishing you best December holiday wishes right now in case I forget at the end. My guest today is an adventurer. He is a guy from Vancouver or near Vancouver. He's Canadian. And he recently spent 9 months sailing around the world by himself on a sailboat, never touching land, never leaving the water. And he did it by navigating by the stars, which is a very difficult thing to do. We're going to talk to him about that, how he did that. I mean, it's something that the Polynesians allegedly, reportedly, presumably figured out long ago. But it's an uncommon thing. And I think, and I'll ask him to correct me if I'm wrong when he joins me in a minute, that he was the first North American to circumnavigate the globe using only celestial navigation. Quite an adventure. And he had some adventures coming along. We'll hear about those too. But, first, as we often do, I begin with tasting a wine from a particular part of the world and tell you about visiting wineries in that part of the world. Staying domestic today because I found in my cellar, I live in an apartment. I don't have a wine cellar. I do keep some good wines in somebody else's cellar. But I found in my boxes of wine here a wine that I bought back in about 2011. Gosh, what's that? 10 years ago. In the state of Virginia. I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. I had not yet moved to Minnesota. Had not yet fallen in love with the wrong woman who caused me to move here, or I caused myself to move here. But this is from a winery called Green Hill. It's a bottle of red. I don't think it even tells me the grape type on here, does it? It doesn't. I'm a little sorry about that. They do blends. I looked up their website. They do not have a very robust website. They're selling red wine and white wine, priced between, I think, $16 and a little over $23 or $24. They have about, 8 varieties of red, about 8 varieties of white. They've got a blush. They use some grapes I've never heard of, as well as some Merlot, Cab Franc, Cabernet, some of which I'm sure is grown in Virginia. I know they do source a lot of their grapes from the Finger Lakes up in New York State, where some very nice wines are made. So I can't tell you. I'm sure this is like a Cabernet, a Bordeaux blend with a lot of Cabernet. It's a red. I haven't tasted it. I just opened it. You can see it topped off right there. I'm going to pour it in the glass. Again, this might need a little air. It's 10 years old. From Virginia. Let's see how Virginia is doing. There's not one state in the United States that does not grow grapes and produce wine. Not one, including Alaska and Texas and Florida and places you wouldn't expect to find vineyards. So I just swirled around a little to get a little air. Nose is pretty nice. If somebody gave this to me and said, "You want to drink it?" I'd smell the nose and I would say, "Sure, smells good to me." Doesn't smell unusual, even though it's from an unusual state for wine. Let me try it. It's a big red. It's a little harsher than I would expect for a wine that's been in the bottle for 10 years, but I would wager that in about 20 or 30 minutes, this might taste a lot differently and a lot softer. I mean, it's been held prisoner in the bottle for so long. You can visit wineries in Virginia, and they're not far outside of Washington, D.C. This one is near Middleburg, Virginia, which is known as horse country if you're a D.C. person, as I was for 40 years. Quite wealthy area. A lot of people with horse farms. In fact, Donald Trump bought a farm there from a woman who had fallen on hard times, and he grows grapes there. He says it's the greatest wine in the world, but Donald Trump says that about everything he does. I've tasted it. It's okay. He didn't plant the vines. The woman before him did. At any rate, you can visit his winery. You can visit Green Hill. And there are dozens of others. They're not hard to find. They're generally, leaving aside COVID season, they're generally open for visitors. Some have food. In fact, I noticed this website doesn't tell me anything about the place, but it does say Green Hill Winery and Cafe, I think. So I guess they have food there. Let me try this again. Eminently drinkable. I'll pour the rest of it during dinner tonight with no problem. Actually, it's not bad. It's pretty good. I'm starting to like it. Can I say that about all Virginia wines? No, I don't think you can say it about all California wines either. But at any rate, there you go. So if you live in the East Coast and you're not snowed in, well, wait till spring or summer. It's a pretty time to visit. Middlewood is rolling hills, a lot of horse country, beautiful place to visit. Some very nice B&Bs, a fancy resort there, and a really nice part of America, particularly the Middle East is not the right way to put it. The eastern part of the middle of the East Coast, which I would think of as Washington, Delaware, etc. All right. So we're going to meet our adventurer. Let's bring him on. His name is Bert terHart. It's an unusual spelling. It's a small T-E-R with a large H-A-R-T. And that it has a Dutch derivation. There he is. Hi, Bert.
Hello. Thank you, Rudy.
Now, Bert, we talked a little earlier. You explained your missing tooth. Let's get that out of the way. What happened? You look like a pirate. You are a pirate.
Yeah, well, it's Sea Billy Bert. That's how that's what my friends call me now. So I had, as all Canadians you have to be missing a tooth because you got smacked in the mouth with a hockey stick. So that happened to me. I had the tooth replaced, but when I was sailing, I was working in the cockpit and I was thrown into some of the steel guardrails that stop you from going overboard. And I hit it with my mouth, and I broke that tooth. I broke that tooth back out. So,
now was this on your around the world trip, or just out with friends recently?
No, that was going around the world.
So you broke your tooth. So there's blood everywhere. You could do nothing about it because you weren't allowed. Am I correct that if you were going to have what sailors recognize as going around the globe, you're not allowed to touch land, not allowed to go into land?
No, not at all. You are allowed to anchor. You can seek under certain circumstances a port of refuge, which is or harbor of refuge, which is perfectly allowed. Which doesn't, even though you're anchored, you're still technically underway. So as long as you don't set foot ashore or don't have anybody help you in any way or shape or form, then you're still fine. So I actually had to stop in the Falkland Islands to avoid a massive, extremely severe storm. So I anchored. I called ahead, asked for port of refuge. They granted me access as long as, of course, I didn't leave the boat and all that sort of thing. So but the rules are you can't step ashore. That's
so you couldn't sneak out even in the Falklands to see a local dentist.
No, no.
Oh God! All right. We've sold the fact that you heard me at the beginning because I know you were listening. You circumnavigated the globe using a celestial navigation. We're going to talk about that. Obviously, you've had some close encounters with meeting your maker. We'll talk about that. But let's start at the beginning. You were born in Canada. You grew up in Canada, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And you majored in something that didn't later become your career. You want to describe your early life?
Well, I grew up on the prairies, very, very close to the North Dakota border. So I'm a good old prairie kid, and both my parents were Dutch, or are Dutch, and I grew up sailing. My father, when there was no ice on whatever body of water was available, we were sailing on it, or paddling on it, or swimming in it. So my father taught myself and my other siblings to sail, and it's just sort of been in my blood ever since. So and my father as well, before he emigrated to Canada, he was in the Dutch Merchant Marine. So and his father was, and my uncles were. So it's sort of in my blood. And the first chance
are they all missing teeth too? All of them?
my father is, but he has a much better excuse than me. He's a little older than I am.
Okay.
So I ended up going to military college because at the time, the only place to get a degree in oceanography, an undergraduate degree in physical oceanography, was in the Canadian Navy. So that's what I did. I went to the Canadian equivalent of Annapolis, I guess, and then graduated. But unfortunately, I'm colorblind. I'm completely colorblind. So when I got there, when I was recruited, they don't tell you those sort of things because I want to be in the Navy and this is what I want to do. They said, okay, sure, sign on the dotted line. So I did. I got there, I got the color vision test, and they said, well, you can't be in the Navy. These are your only choices. You can be in the Army or you can be in the Army. What would you like to do? So I ended up graduating with a degree in physics and physical oceanography. Then I went to the Canadian Special Service Force, eventually finished as a platoon commander. And then as soon as I was done my stint, I went back to graduate school to study oceanography again, because it's really my first love. And I worked, I've got a master's degree, ended up working as a university researcher for a while, and realized that I had more entrepreneurial sort of bents. And I ended up, even though as a physical oceanographer, you do a lot of computer programming. So I became good at computer programming and eventually left academia to do that. And as soon as I got a chance to move back to the coast, I did, and eventually ended up buying a sailboat and then, going sailing. So
you spent how many years in a different career though?
Oh, my just about my entire adult life. I'm probably 35 years.
Doing what?
I had a software development company where we worked specifically for healthcare professionals. We developed software that was help clinicians do differential diagnostics for patient intake, and we sold that sort of software and clinic management software into the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Australia. So it was really successful, and I really liked it. I loved it actually, because it's very, very hard. It's very challenging and requires a lot of creativity. But again, when I was doing that, the first chance I get, my avocation was always sailing in some way, shape, or form, or trying to get to sea in some way, shape, or form. So, did
you have a family?
Yes, I've got 4 kids.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, the 4 adult kids. The oldest is married. She with I have grandchildren as well. She is an accountant. My oldest son is he works as a emergency medical tech, and my second oldest son is a pilot, and my youngest daughter is back in school.
And do all of them sail?
No,
no,
no. They've all been on the boat, and they've all been everywhere. Oh, I shouldn't say everywhere, but they've been around locally.
Yeah.
But
they want to keep all their teeth, right?
They want to keep their teeth. Yeah, they are a little less. They're a little less hardcore about it than I am. Let's say.
Did you wake up one morning and think, "Hey, I'd like to go around the world in a sailboat by myself"? How did this come to be? No, I never did. I mean, that's people think it was some sort of dream that I'd fostered ever since I was a small child, but no, that wasn't the case at all. I had sailed extensively. I'd sailed probably on the boat that I took around the world. I'd sailed something like 15,000 or 18,000 miles, something like that, here on the west coast of the Americas. So up to the Bering Sea, out to the Aleutian Islands, around circumnavigated Vancouver Island, out to the Queen Charlotte's. So I'd done a lot of sailing, but I'd always thought I would go around the world, but I thought I would do it more or less in the context of the typical, jaunt through the tropics, in the Pacific, and end up in the Mediterranean, sipping wine as you are. But I about 3 years ago, I decided that I would go around. I would do the hardest possible thing you could do, and I've always been drawn to things that are difficult. This is extraordinarily difficult, and I just decided that's what I was going to do, and I decided I would do it, make it harder by using celestial navigation, and I was really motivated when there was a reincarnation of the race that, though the first person to sail around the world was Sir Robin Knox Johnson. He did it in conjunction or as part of a race, and that was in 1969 when he finished. And that there was a reincarnation of that race in 2018, and only five people finished that race, and no North Americans or South Americans. And I realized if I was going to go around the world and do something sort of unique, then I had better do it before someone else does it, because the race is going to go again. And I figured now's the time. So I decided about 3 years ago now that I was going to do it. And it took me about a year to really come to grips with, the reality and the enormity of it all. And then another year to prepare, and basically a year to do it. Okay. So when did you start out, and when did you returned just as COVID was starting in May, or was it March?
I left October. I left in 2019, October 27th, and I returned July 18th, 2020.
Oh, July 18th. So COVID was well underway at that point.
Yeah.
And you shook hands or bumped elbows with no one for what, 266, 267 days?
Yeah, 265 days. The only off Rarotonga, I ran out of, I didn't run out of food. I was down to less than 800 calories a day. And I originally planned for the trip to be about 7 months. And I took food for about 8.5 months. And as it turned out, my appetite was absolutely enormous. And I realized very quickly on that I was going to run out of food. So I had calculated that I was going to finish with eating basically literally a tablespoon of rice a day and about a liter of water. And my sister wasn't going to, she was adamant that wouldn't happen. So when I went by, I was about 300 miles away from Rarotonga going north.
Where is Rarotonga?
Rarotonga is in the South Pacific. It's sort of between New Zealand and Tahiti.
Okay.
And first visited by Captain Bligh, by the way. So I was, the first, I should say, first white man to visit was Captain Bligh. Anyway, I was about 300 miles away, and my sister said, "Why don't you just cruise by, just in case?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." I had thought if I'm going to really run out of food, I'll stop in Hawaii. And she said, "Well, why don't you just try?" And I said, "Well, there's nobody there. It's a small island. What can they do?" But she moved heaven and earth to get a food drop for me that the people in Rarotonga, I mean, they were, the COVID restrictions at that time in the Pacific Islands were absolutely draconian. They're primarily ministered by they're primarily ministered by New Zealand, and the COVID lockdowns were incredibly militaristic for good reason. And they were very, very concerned about what it would look like to everyone else, because, all kinds of people could stumble in a sailboat and just, drop off at some tropical paradise and have not such a bad time of it, in lockdown. So they were very wary about me. They were very concerned what it would look like to their general population. They wanted to make sure that all safety protocols were met, et cetera, et cetera. So what they did is, what eventually happened after some real machinations behind the scenes, is that I stopped about 4 miles offshore, and then a small boat came along, and they threw a bunch of food into the boat.
And your sister was there, right? She was orchestrating all of this from Canada?
Yeah, she did it all in secret by Canada. So we weren't allowed to say anything about it until a week later, after the Rarotongan government had a chance to publicly declare to their own population what had happened. So they were, like I said, they were very careful about making sure that the rules that they were sort of breaking for me, they weren't going to break for everybody else. So a small boat pulled alongside with someone from the health ministry, someone from the police, someone from Customs and Immigration, loaded right to the gills, and they put on enough food for me to sort of finish the rest of the trip in relative ease and comfort. So although I was I didn't have a lot of food left, that's for sure, but I was prepared to do it. But I'm glad I never had to.
All right, let's start with the basics for those who are sailors in the audience. What kind of boat were you sailing?
I have a very, very traditional boat. It's a little bit like taking an RV on the Paris to Dakar rally. You can do it, but it's not recommended. So this is a boat that I went sailing with on my family. It's beautifully comfortable for that sort of thing. It's a very the boat is designed. Well, the design of the boat is something like the early mid '60s. You would never design a boat like this today. You'd never buy a boat like this today. Sailboat design is sort of gone miles ahead of this, but it's a very comfortable, very seaworthy boat. So it's
how long is it? Did you say? It's
45 feet. It's a Reliance 44 is the make of the boat.
Okay.
Built in Canada in Hamilton, Ontario, just south of Toronto.
Okay.
And she's been all over the world. She's been out to the Mediterranean, into Malta, like I say, out to the Aleutians, to Bering Sea. and now around the world. So she has legs, I'll say that. But it's not at all. It's not a race boat by any stretch of the imagination. It's not fast by any stretch of the imagination. But it certainly is comfortable. That's a certainty.
Okay, so you set out, and you get sent off by your friends and family, I'm sure, at the dock, and trace your route for us for a bit. I presume you had to go around, I'm not even a sailor, and I know the Cape of Good Hope is not exactly a bathwater. Take us on your route and highlight the places that were the most, shall I say, strenuous as opposed to, or maybe even dangerous.
Well, when I left, I had no sponsors whatsoever. I didn't want to do it under the auspices of anyone else except me. So the only person that was at the dock when I left was my wife. There was zero fanfare. And I had thought that during the trip that who would be interested in some old guy going around the world in his boat. So I left with zero fanfare, which is perfectly fine. I didn't want to leave any other way. So
do you have your life insurance policy in the back of her pocket? Was it?
Well, no one will insure you. I can tell you that. There's no rider you can get that will insure some 62-year-old guy sailing around the world. And I was relatively inexperienced. This is my first time sailing around the world. So, had I been, 4 or 5 other times, which other people have done, then perhaps. But yeah, so anyway, no life insurance. So I had to come home. That was my wife's order to me, was that you better come back. So if you leave Victoria, you head straight west out the Strait of Juan de Fuca for about 60 miles, and then you make a hard left, and you go straight south for 6,000 miles. And after those 6,000 or 6,600 miles, you come to the bottom of South America, which is Cape Horn. And as far as sailors are concerned, Cape Horn is the Great Cape. It is symbolic with, it's synonymous with all the great sailors. Not that I want to lump myself in that category.
Synonymous for what? What do you mean by great?
Well, there's 5 Great Capes.
Pretty to look at, or dangerous to cross?
All those things. I think for sailors, there's more of a mystical, spiritual, metaphysical aspect of the Great Capes. They're in order to go around the world, you have to pass every single one of them. Anyone who's ever tread, or anybody else's wake who's ever been around the world, or has ever gone from the Pacific to the Atlantic, or vice versa, or the Indian to the Atlantic Oceans, or from the Indian back into the Pacific, has to have gone around a Great Cape. So you're following in the footsteps of Vasco da Gama, Magellan, Cook, Bligh. The list goes on and on and on. So you are literally in, and of course the places are completely primordial. They've never changed because they're so remote. They're so remote. So you can feel the presence of the people that have been there before, and the people who've been there before are those people who've put their stamp on the world's oceans in ways that really aren't possible now. So, and Cape Horn, amongst the Great Capes, is the one that's most iconic because it's the farthest south. It's the most difficult to get around. The weather is absolutely horrific. It's beyond terrible for
all the time.
Not all the time, but almost all the time. So you basically pick and choose. Firstly, you have to leave North America, where I left, at a very specific time to get to Cape Horn. So you're not there in the middle of wintertime, where it would be beyond foolhardy to attempt to go around, especially in a small boat. So your Cape Horn is by far and away the most iconic, and it's in some ways the most difficult. And then from Cape Horn, it's from there you're just going straight east as fast as you possibly can for about 15,000 nautical miles.
Now so, you're under sail, right? When you say as fast as you can, if there's no wind,
no,
that's a relative term, isn't it?
Yeah. It's when I say as fast as you can. That's a really good point, Rudy. I'm going at a quick walk, so you're traveling at about between 5 and 6 knots in my boat, which is a quick walk.
Right.
So it's not for me, it wasn't a race, and it's not fast by any stretch.
Okay.
And I was certainly becalmed. Like, one of the things that caused me to be so long, or the trip to be 9 months, was that I was becalmed for more than 50 days. And being becalmed is just terrible because there's no wind, but that doesn't mean that the waves have gone down. So the motion
how many days?
50 days.
In a row?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, thank God, not in a row.
Oh my gosh, I was going to say you go crazy.
Yeah, but the 50 days translates to about 5,500 nautical miles, which is close to, which is more than it's like 55 days.
Right.
So I spent the trip was, almost 2 months or at least a month longer than it should have been, just because there was no wind. And that's not usual. I was especially tortured by the fact that there wasn't a lot of wind. In places where there should have been wind, like in the Southern Hemisphere, in the roaring 40s or below 40 degrees south latitude and into 50 degrees south latitude, the wind is just, it's always, in a climatological sense, it's always windy.
Which
They're
is
referred to
the roaring 40s, right?
The roaring 40s, the screaming 50s, or I'm sorry, the furious 50s and the screaming, and the screaming 60s. But it didn't turn out that way for me, for the most case. I ended up calling it the boring 40s when I was, blogging away. So anyway, so from Cape Horn, you're really going straight east all the way around the world to New Zealand, and then it's northeast back home. So from Cape Horn, you go to Cape Agulhas, which is very close to the Cape of Good Hope. That's the bottom of South Africa, and from there it's across the South Indian Ocean.
We've got Cape Agulhas on the screen now. Now, where is that?
That's the bottom of South Africa.
Okay.
In Cape Town.
It's near Cape Town. Yeah, it's a quick hour or so from Cape Town. Yeah, okay.
An hour or two, yeah. So Cape Agulhas is just marginally south of the Cape of Good Hope. So people are familiar, or people would have heard that the bottom of South America is the Cape of Good Hope, but formally it's Cape Agulhas. But
you mean the bottom of Africa?
Yes, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, the bottom of Africa.
Okay.
And then from Africa, it's across the Indian Ocean, the South Indian Ocean, to Cape Leeuwin, which is the bottom of West Australia. And from Cape Leeuwin, it's to Tasmania, which is Southeast Cape. So bottom of Australia, bottom of Tasmania, and then the last one, the fifth Great Cape, is South Cape, and off the bottom of New Zealand, off of Stewart Island. And South Cape is one of the 4 cardinal capes named by Captain Cook. So there's North, South, East, and West Cape in New Zealand, and you go around South Cape.
And I know, for example, I guess in Cape, you tell me, I'm speaking totally out of ignorance here, but I gather capes mean difficult because oceans are colliding. Is that why there's water up there?
Yes, that's
on all capes. On all of these capes.
Nope, you're right in assuming or in saying that there's around every cape. But doesn't matter where it is. Even here in the Strait of Georgia, there's always a confluence of wind, wave, and current. So they're always dangerous.
Okay.
And at the bottom of Cape Horn, it's the Atlantic, literally the Atlantic and the Pacific meet, and they meet over a shallow bank. So if you run into problems there, the problems are exacerbated by the fact that you have literally oceans colliding. At the bottom of Africa, where it's Cape Agulhas, you end up with the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean again colliding. And at the bottom of in Cape Leeuwin, it's the South Tasman Sea and the Indian Ocean. And then down at the bottom of New Zealand, again, it's the South Tasman Sea and the Pacific. So it's the currents are always augmented by the fact that there's this sort of piece of geography sticking out. There's always a certain amount of shallowing, which is very dangerous when you're at sea, because you literally have
a certain amount of what?
The shallowing. The water gets shallow.
Oh. Okay.
So so the average depth of the ocean is 4 kilometers, 4,000 meters, and around the capes you have 4,000 meters or basically 3.5 miles of water in depth, and it's being squished into about 300 meters, or say 300 yards deep. So you get 3 miles that get squashed down into 300 yards. So all that water has to go somewhere, and it makes it's very turbulent. The waves get huge, they get chaotic and jumbled. So they can be, it's in the middle of the ocean, there's virtually no tides, but near land there's a lot of tide. So it can be there's all this physical oceanography going on around these capes.
So, now you told me, because we've talked before this, you told me that you often only slept 4 hours in 24 hours, and they were 2 hour shifts. Is that because you were sailing at night and had to be aware of where you were at all times?
Oh yeah, the boat is going 24/7, so and it needs constant attention.
You sleep for 2 hours if it's going 24. You're in the middle of a big ocean.
Well, you have to very carefully manage your sleep patterns, because you have to sleep. If you don't sleep, then
you go crazy.
You literally go crazy. Like I was experimenting with how much sleep I needed. I started out with sleeping for 1 hour, and then waking up and then going back to sleep again for another hour, and then sort of maybe getting between 3 and 4 hours of sleep that way. But after about 40 days of that, my mental acuity had begun to be my mental acuity degraded tremendously. I was physically weak. I was uncoordinated. I was unable to make decisions quickly. So it gets dangerous very quickly, right? So, and I realized that
you can't anchor in 4 kilometers of ocean.
No. So I realized that when I kept walking by the same dishes all the time, and dishes, there's one guy, you're on a boat, your dishes they consist of a bowl and a spoon. And I'm walking by the dishes going, I need to do the dishes. I got to do the dishes. Then, 10 minutes later, I said, I can't believe I need to do the dishes. I got to do the dishes. So after I would do this for all day long. And then I'd realize after about 4 days of this, if I can't make a decision to do the dishes, I got to be doing something different, because this isn't going to work.
Wow. So
I bumped up my sleep, in sort of 20-minute increments till I got to the point where I could still function and be safe and still manage the boat and get enough sleep. So you're constantly trying to strike this balance between keeping the boat going, which means being awake and trimming the sails and setting sails and navigating and all that sort of thing, and then getting enough rest, because there is only you, and the boat has to go 24/7. There's just no other way about it.
So where you, again, because we talked, I can tell the audience this, twice your boat tilted so far into the water that your mast was underwater and you were floating in your cockpit, which, again, not being a sailor, it doesn't sound very appealing or safe or a good adventure to me. Did those happen on capes, or are they just storms you happen to run into?
They're just storms. I mean, when you leave,
did you not know where storms were because you didn't have any electronic equipment?
Oh no, I knew where storms were because I was able to get weather forecasts. Like it would be beyond foolish to do this sort of trip without some sort of forecasting capability. Because if you do get yourself in trouble, you have a choice to make. You basically have a philosophical choice. You can choose not to get help, because it was your decision to go out there and do something sort of foolhardy, as it were. And then why would you then presume on someone, or why would you then ask someone else to risk their life to come save your foolish one? So you have to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to ask someone to come help you when you need it.
Right.
So when I say it's foolish to go, there's all kinds of. We could have a long talk about that. But the point is, if you go on this sort of trip, then doing so without some kind of idea what the weather is going to be is just asking for trouble. Like if you go to the Southern Ocean looking for trouble, you will find it in spades. If you go on any ocean looking for trouble, you're going to find it in spades. So I knew that when I was going into the Southern Ocean, the most extreme, the most violent, the most remote marine environment on the planet, bar none, that the boat was going to be knocked down. So the mast was going to end up in the water. The boat is like, there's lots of whenever
you knew that, you knew inevitably that would happen at some point.
Yeah, so you have to set the boat up so that it can survive that sort of
and event. Was it at night? Was it during the day? Was it obviously a violent storm?
Yeah, both times were violent storms. Both times happened at night, but I was still awake. Both times I happened to be in the cockpit, and both times I ended up swimming. So like,
were you attached to anything when this happens?
Oh yeah, you at night you cannot be in those conditions. You cannot be. You have to be attached down below. Forget about being outside. You can't be down below and not be attached to something because you'll be injured. All
right, let me see if I can get this picture right. So you're down below in a cabin, and your boat tilts all the way so the mast goes into the water. So water comes obviously into the boat and down into your cabin?
Well, sure, that happened a lot as well. Like that, your job driving the boat is to keep the water out. Like that's your job as captain, as skipper, is to keep the water on the other side of the hull.
How do you get water outside of your cabin once it's in?
You pump it out or sponge it or take a bucket. It's
all right. Okay.
So,
And
but
what were you thinking during those two times? What a great adventure this is.
Well, let me be clear. When the mast was in the water and the times that I was outside, I wasn't down below, I was outside. So I was actually swimming outside. So the mast, which is normally like this, is now horizontal.
Yeah, I got that.
Or like this underwater. And the boat is itself probably 80% underwater. So the amount of boat that's sticking up is virtually none. So I'm swimming. Basically, I was swimming up like this into the cockpit. I'm attached to the boat. I'm not necessarily worried because I think the boat is going to come back. But it's exciting. Let's put it that way.
I think the boat is going to come back, and I'm not necessarily worried. Okay.
Well,
okay. All right, Bert, you're the guy.
Well,
and where did this happen? Where did these two incidents happen?
They both times happened in the South Tasman Sea. Well, actually, one in the southern Tasman, and then one just around New Zealand. After I got around New Zealand.
All right, let me ask you a couple of questions. We've had a few people asking questions. First, Kevin McNeely answers a question related to what we're talking about now. Did the boat ever roll? I presume that meant it goes 360 degrees around.
Yeah, that's so when I talked about the boat was most likely going to come back. Yeah, the boat never rolled.
Okay.
I had said it. I was prepared for that because it happens probably 50%. I shouldn't say 50. Probably 20% of the time. Boats my size will roll in the Southern Ocean in extreme storms. So I was prepared for that. I had the boat set up for that. I was.
You've got to be
kidding happen,
me.
But
you've got to be kidding me.
No.
I was thinking about doing an around the world sail too. Geez, that's all right. Bert, let me ask another question. This was and Don asked this earlier before we talked about the boat going sideways. On your trip, Bert asked on your trip, did you at any time feel like you weren't going to make it because of the weather?
No. I was very concerned about sailing the boat to bits, or what I call sailing the boat to bits, which is you can sail so hard that the boat literally comes apart, and that's entirely possible to do. And if you follow any of the ocean racing that's going on now, or any of the other solo racers, it's perfectly possible to just literally sail the boat to pieces. So I was very conservative about that, and I was.
How do you avoid that?
Well, you take
down the sail so you're not going as fast. Or?
Yes, yeah. So you can try. I made every effort to be ahead of the boat to make sure that that I was ahead of the weather, that I was deciding what strategies I was going to be using for steering or for what sails I'd have up, what I would be doing in case of emergency, what I would be doing if I felt there's a risk of rolling or being knocked down. What if I felt the weather was going to be deteriorating or improving? So I was trying to always trying to stay ahead of the boat. If you get behind the boat, you're done.
All right, I'm not laughing because of what you're saying, Kevin, who asked that question. He lives in the West Coast, but he sometimes comes up here to a place called Madeline Island on Wisconsin, which is an island. And he just said, do not invite this guy to Madeline for a sail. Sarah asks, why can't more functions be automated for overnight purposes? I guess she means so you can get a decent night's sleep of maybe 3 hours.
Well, I think that for people who aren't sailors, the boat steers itself. So I only actually was behind the wheel or behind the, driving the boat, as it were, for probably 7 hours total, maybe 9 hours total. There's a device at the back of the boat.
24-hour period.
Total in the whole trip.
Wait a minute, you're only steering the boat for 9 hours.
That's right. There's a device on the back of the boat that steers for you. So you get the boat going in the direction you want. You have the sails that you want up. The boat is not overpowered or underpowered. And there's a device at the back of the boat that steers relative to the apparent wind. So it steers all the time. You couldn't do it. It would be absolutely impossible to do it without some kind of self-steering.
So you haven't typed something in a computer that tells it where to steer? No,
no.
Wind.
Just the wind, yeah.
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
So the boat is steering. The wind vane is steering the boat relative to the wind.
Right.
And it's an incredible device. There was I use a servo pendulum type device. It was designed by a British commando, actually. Blondie Hassler. It was a tremendous story. This guy, he conducted one of the most successful commando raids, if not the most successful commando raid in the history of the Second World War. Anyway, interesting story.
So he wanted to get sleep at night while he was sailing, right?
Yeah. Well, this guy sailed across the Atlantic in a tiny boat, and he realized that, like all sailors that go by themselves or go sail solo, or any sailor for that matter, that steering is an incredibly arduous task. So, I can steer better than the wind vane for maybe 5 minutes.
Really?
But I can't steer better than the wind vane for 20. And I
certainly had no idea.
They're fantastic. They're incredible. And they steer, like the one I had, it's a monitor wind vane. It steered through the worst possible conditions you can imagine. I remember looking out the cockpit and wondering, how the heck can this thing know what to do? So you're not steering, which is why you can actually function, because when you are steering, then there's no eating, there's no sleeping, there's no drinking, there's nothing. You just sit there and drive and suffer.
Got it.
And it's impossible.
All right, I want to get into celestial navigation, how you learned how to do that, because I know it's very difficult. But just one quick question. Michael asks, if you're not allowed to go on land, how did you resupply food, water, and gasoline, etc.?
I didn't. I brought enough water on board for the whole trip.
Wow.
And I thought I'd be able to collect rainwater, which I was able to do. I didn't have to, but I was able to do. There was enough. I'm not using the engine, or I'm only using the engine sort of to keep. I turned it over to stop it from seizing up solid. So I didn't need diesel fuel for anything. And I'm using virtually no electricity because I'm not using chart plotters or GPS or anything of that sort, radars, you name it. It's all turned off. The only electricity I have is basically for LED lights and basically something that broadcasts my position to other boats so I don't get run over, an AIS transponder. So I had very little use or demand for electricity, but I brought lots of water. So
I never thought we'd be we're not out of time. I just want to say, I want to get into I want to talk about how you felt. Did you ever get depressed? Were you lonely? Let's get to that in a minute, but talk about celestial navigation, because I once read either a book or a New Yorker piece or something on the art of celestial navigation, which is very difficult, and apparently it's been people who know how to do it. There are fewer and fewer people who do, and I know some Polynesian people are trying to sort of pass down that knowledge to Hawaiians, for example, because you got nothing but the stars to tell you where you are and where you ought to be going. Correct?
Yeah, you use the stars, the moon, the planets.
How did you learn that? How did you know it? Is it difficult to learn?
It's not difficult to learn. It's tedious and it's esoteric, and it's on board a small boat at sea. It's really, really hard because taking the site, you need to take an accurate measurement of how high a particular, so let's say how high a star is above the horizon in degrees. So you use a very delicate particular instrument to do that, and it's easy on land when you're standing at a desk, when both feet are firmly planted on terra firma. But Imagine trying to measure something with a string, standing on the roof of your car while your best friend is punching you in the back and someone's pulling on your leg, and someone else is yanking on your arm. So it's really hard to take an accurate measurement at sea on a small boat. Firstly, because you can't see the horizon. And secondly, the little tiny star you're seeing is also bouncing all over the place as you are. So there's difficulty, with taking the measurement. And then you have to go down below and figure everything out without a calculator.
And how often do you have to take a measure of the stars, so to speak?
Well,
once a month, once a day, once a night?
Ideally twice a day.
Really?
Yeah. Ideally twice a day. You want to get a fix of your position twice a day, which is entirely impossible. That's the ideal situation.
Well, it's cloudy sometimes.
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. So in the Southern Ocean, the weather's always terrible. Or I should say the weather's marginal. There's the waves are large. You can't see the horizon. There's too much spray. You can't risk the sextant outside. You can't stand outside. Of course, and there's cloud cover obscuring the sun, the stars, the moons, and the planets. So it's not at all ideal. It's really, really tough actually, because the chances are so few far in between. So sometimes I spent 40 minutes outside holding the sextant, behind my back, trying to keep it out of the spray, just waiting for that perfect moment when, the boat and the horizon and everything would be at the right place at the right time. And then you have to go down below once you've actually taken the measurement, figured out what time that was. I use just a simple wristwatch. You've got to go down below and figure it all out. So, but don't forget the boat is always moving. So to figure stuff out, to do the arithmetic sometimes is because you're so tired and exhausted. Usually doing it at night is really tough. Because you're so tired and exhausted, it's really easy to make a simple mistake. You make a simple mistake, and the mistakes compound themselves, and then it turns into a mess. And you've got to try to figure it out. And then after you do the calculation, you got to plot it on a piece of paper. Again, imagine trying to write something down with your best friend pushing you in the back, somebody yanking on your leg, and alternately someone's grabbing the pencil out of your hand. So it's the logistics of actually just doing it is difficult. Learning it is entirely possible for anyone who's motivated. It's not hard. It's like I said, it's esoteric. You don't really need to know a lot of math because everything is done out of a table. But just like I say, the physicality associated with sitting at a chart table, small, in a boat that's all over the place, when you're soaking wet, trying to do something accurately, is a challenge that, frankly, I had underestimated because I'd always done it, around here, which is not at all. Even the Gulf of Alaska, and those people who might be familiar with The Deadliest Catch, that reality show, might have some idea of what the Bering Sea looks like. Well, that's small potatoes compared to the Southern Ocean. There's no comparison. I've sailed in them both. I've been to those places. I'm going there again actually this summer. So I know what that place looks like. I've been.
Is that why you're doing all those measurements?
Well, you're doing. There's no risk of you running into land because you're literally the closest person to me was on the International Space Station, 200 miles that way. So you're literally in some cases you're 2,500 miles away from land, so there's not going to hit any land.
Right.
But you're navigating to avoid the weather, so that there's a big storm coming, and and if I can get the boat even 20 or 30 or 40 miles out of the worst of it, then it could be literally. I don't mean to exaggerate, but it can be the difference between life and death. So and like I said, I sailed very conservatively, so I wanted to avoid all the bad weather, and I made a conscious, deliberate effort to do that. So
that's when you take the wheel. Then is to get somewhere.
You figure out where you are, where you want to go, and then you just adjust the wind vane to drive you in that direction. So,
you adjust the wind vane, which adjusts. Oh, I see. I didn't know that was a method of steering.
So to change course, I would just pop my head up out of the cockpit, out of the cabin. Twitch a little string, which would adjust the wind vane, and then go back to my, whatever I was doing down below.
All right, let's talk about your psychological state during this. Were you the happy-go-lucky fellow you are today in this webcast all the time? Were you exhausted? Were you depressed? Did you have second thoughts? How did I get here? How do I get out of here? I'll trade my soul for a helicopter. What kind of? I missed my wife. Well, of course you missed your wife. Let's say that on the record. But all that other stuff. Give us a capsule of the psychological cost of going around the world by yourself, never touching land, and using celestial navigation.
Well, firstly, I guess with respect to celestial navigation, I had brought along what I thought are all the important books. So I have never read the Bible cover to cover. I've never read the Quran cover to cover. I've never read the Tibetan Book of the Dead cover to cover. I've never read what I consider to be the really foundational books for us as humans, cover to cover, snippets, and of course all the classical literature by all these different guys. So I thought I'd have all this time to read. I didn't. So I know I brought all the stuff and never read. The only books I read were how to fix this or how to fix that, technical manuals. So I was brutally disappointed by that. And one of the reasons was I spent close to 3 hours a day navigating. And if I would have had 2 hours a day to read, I would have been, maybe a little bit mentally, I would have been in better shape. But I was, I'm not the kind of guy that gets lonely. So of course you're alone, but that's not the same as lonely. So firstly, so I was never lonely. But you're certainly alone. And isolated. I also never really thought of myself as being isolated because, maybe that's just delusional. Maybe that's just sort of some.
Did you have a radio phone or some way you could talk to people?
Well, I had a single sideband along, but which would allow me voice communication.
Satellite phone, I should have said, not radio. Satellite phone, I meant.
Yeah, so I had what I had for communication was this single sideband, which failed, sadly, because that was my weather backup and my primary means of voice communication. So that failed off the coast of off of Baja California early in the trip, which was a real setback. But I had along an Iridium Go. An Iridium Go is a small satellite receiver which allows for very low bandwidth communication via satellite. So I was able to send emails, and I was able to get weather back. So data, I was able to get data via this Iridium Go satellite link. And it also allows for very limited voice communication. So, and sadly, where I was in the south, pretty much everywhere, the Iridium voice communication was unusable. So I had almost no, well, I had virtually no voice communication with anyone while I was away.
Did you ever get depressed? Did you ever think, why am I doing this?
I was never depressed, but I can certainly tell you that you run the entire gamut of human emotion. I guess if I say that, then of course, I would have had to by definition have been depressed, but I was certainly, I never felt like quitting. That might be the military in me. I just, I decided I was going to go. I decided I was going to do it because I believe I never thought I was going to quit. I never ever felt like quitting. I think if I would have allowed myself that thought before I left, I probably would have quit. In the same way that I used to run when I was in college, and if I ever thought that the course was too long or I wasn't going to finish the marathon, if I got too tired, I could always bail. Then for me, that was just setting yourself up for failure. So once I left, and the only time I figured I was going to step off the boat again was when I got back. End of story. So I never entertained quitting.
Okay.
I never entertained this is too hard or too rough or anything like that. But I often entertained the thoughts about the boat isn't going to make it. What can I do to make sure the boat doesn't come apart? I was worried about getting injured. So what I guess I'm trying to say is that of all the emotions that I experienced, I was anxious a lot. I was anxious about getting injured. I was anxious about the boat. I was anxious about running out of food because I was, rationing food very carefully. So I was anxious. I wasn't. And one of the things I discovered was that, I'd get in the cockpit, whether it be calm or terrible or horrible, whatever the case might be. I think, how the hell am I ever going to go another 19,647 miles to get home? I mean, so I think, 19, that's just, it's literally the other side of the world. Like, how can I literally get to the other side of the world and get home? But I realized my mind could get around, well, I can get the next mile. I mean, forget about 19,000 miles. I figure I can sail 1 mile. And if I can sail 1 mile, maybe I can sail this 1 mile just a little bit faster or a little bit better, or get a better or more comfortable course. And maybe if I can do that, then maybe that will sort of, be helpful. So my focus shifted from, the end goal or the end game, which is arriving safely in one piece at home, to sailing the next 100 meters. Like, what can I do right now, immediately? What's the simplest, most basic thing I can do to, affect some sort of change that's going to be positive? And what's interesting about that is not everything you do or that you think of is going to have a positive effect. Most of the time it doesn't.
Right.
Because most of your decisions, because every storm is different, every wave is different. What you experienced yesterday may not necessarily be of any value to you today. So you can't second guess yourself, because then you would just do nothing. You'd be paralyzed, or the paralysis of analysis, which is, I don't like that, but I just used it. But the point is that you'd have to be prepared to make a decision, and then be fully prepared to realize that decision is wrong, and then do something else about it. So
before we say goodbye, one more question. You said in a newspaper interview that all those days and nights alone at sea put some things into perspective. Let me quote it. What's left are those things that are truly important to you, that you learn that certain relationships, the noise of the world, everyday routines are not as important as they are when you're doing them every day on land. Mm-hmm. You want to expand on it for 1 minute before we say goodbye and let you?
I think that's probably the most profound thing I left or came back with, is that there are people in relationships in your life and people in your life that those relationships could be new or old, and they somehow resonate with your being at the most fundamental level of you as a person. And when the rest of the normal noise of your everyday existence goes by the wayside, those relationships come to the fore in a way that cannot possibly be ignored. And you realize just how profound they have been, how instrumental they've been in your own makeup, and how important they are to you.
Well said, Bert. I really appreciate your joining us. Incredible. I hats off to you. Amazing job. I'm glad you're home safely. I'm sure your family is as well. I know they were all there, including your dad, to greet you in Vancouver when you got home. Thanks for taking the time this afternoon. Bert terHart is actually writing a book. Do you have a title for your book?
Well, the title I have, my dad's not pleased with. So I want it to be, I thought you were smarter than that.
I think your dad would like that, actually.
Well, that's what he said. That's what my dad said to me when I told him I was going.
Right. But he doesn't want that as a title.
No.
Yeah. So you have some time to think about it.
Yeah.
Good luck in the book. We'll talk to you when the book comes out. And thank you for sharing your incredible adventure with us. Just amazing.
Yeah, my pleasure, Rudy. Look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much, Bert. I just had a little travel news for you. In case you didn't hear, if you were thinking, speaking of wine, as I did at the beginning of the show, if you're thinking of visiting the wine country in Napa has shut down as of midnight tonight. The count got pretty high there for COVID, and so the governor is, the government in Napa, the Napa Valley government has said you got to close all bars, and you can do takeout from restaurants, but you can't go into wineries and taste wines and so on. What else? The FAA has told pilots that they can't fly for 48 hours after they receive a COVID-19 vaccine. That's going to change some pilots' schedules. The Thai government opened its borders as long as you're still willing to quarantine, which is fine. But you got to go on a golfing vacation, basically a group tour where you have to stay at the golf. At least you can go out and play golf, but you still have to do it for either 10 or 14 days. I don't know if they've decided how many days yet before you can go anywhere else in the country or see anyone else. So if you're thinking of going to Thailand, if you're a golfer, might be a good reason to do it. It's complicated. Call the Thai embassy in Washington, or if you have a consulate like in Los Angeles, they have details. And not only can you not fly to Australia, Australians can't fly out of Australia. The government has just extended till March 17th their ban on outgoing travel. And the reports are that they may even extend that. I didn't know that. And finally, you probably know this if you're a frequent flyer, United and Delta joined American and Alaska by eliminating change fees on international tickets, allegedly forever. I don't believe it's forever because they're leaving billions of dollars on the table, but it might be forever. Let's hope it is. About 6 weeks ago, they eliminated, maybe even longer, eliminated change fees for domestic tickets. But good news for international travelers. If you buy a ticket and you want to change it, you can without paying $200. Now, you may not get your money back. They'll put it in a bank for you or they'll hold on to it. And you can spend it on tickets over the course of the next year. So you don't get your money back, but you avoid that $200 fee. Actually, you can apply it to your next ticket. United alone extended that to its basic economy tickets. Most basic economy tickets on a U.S. Airlines do have a change fee if you want to change. Anyway, that's the travel news. This is our last webcast of this year. I'm so glad you could join us. If you have sailing friends who might want to see this, it'll be up on YouTube. In about 24 hours or so. Just type in Rudy Maxa and Bert terHart, or you can type in I Was Just Thinking with Rudy Maxa, which is sort of the title of my newsletter. If you don't subscribe to the newsletter, go to maxatours.com, scroll all the way to the bottom, put in your name and email, and it's free. I'm sending that out every 2 weeks as well. Anyway, thank you. Happy holidays to all of you. I wish you a happy new year, too, because I won't see you till January 7th, but I look forward to seeing you there. Take care. Bye-bye.